Hi, my name is Philip Odelfelt. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Datavations. Datavations is a market intelligence company based off of big data and AI. We recently raised a $4.2 million seed round.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in and welcome to the Fundraising Debrief, the podcast where we share the real stories behind successful founders and their recent VC financing rounds. My name is Vlad Cazacu and I'll be your host today as we interview Philip Odelfelt. You'll want to pay close attention to this episode as Phil brings a trove of tactical advice for first-time founders with or without a pre-existing network. He's one of the few founders who successfully assembled a roster of investors that is optimized for value add. For more information about running a successful fundraise, including show notes, highlight clips, and exclusive scenes, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Fundraising Debrief, as well as on our website at thefundraisingdebrief.com. This episode is brought to you by Flowlie, the number one choice for secure deck sharing and fundraising automation used by thousands of founders from 50 plus different countries. Now, let's dive right in. Phil, really great to have you on this podcast. Super excited to have you here and unpack your latest seed round. Get a chance to pick your brain about a few topics and hopefully take a lot of learnings from your experience raising this round and what can we help other founders as they're embarking on the journey of raising venture dollars.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Look forward to the conversation.
To kickstart off, we'd love to get everybody a little bit of background on Datavations, so you can quickly tell us a little bit what really you're working on at the firm.
Yeah, most definitely. So we're a market intelligence, or some people call it commerce enablement platform that allows manufacturers to become data driven based off of what their competitors are up to. So it's a combination of, I guess, call it access to our proprietary data set, as well as prescriptive analytics on top of it, leveraging AI. And ultimately, what that means is that if you're trying to make decisions on how to manufacture products, but also commercialize products into retail, which is what we're focused on right now, you have the ability to log into our platform and it will ultimately tell you what is the right product and how to price it and how much to distribute by location, which really are the big question marks in retail. And we help optimize for that in markets that are in tremendous demand of advanced analytics. So we tend to target more outdated industries because we find that's where the biggest gaps are between what we can provide and what they have today.
And it definitely seems that making sense of data, capturing insights from large data sets has been your motto around your whole professional career, now building that as a founder. I'm curious, having seen this space over the past years, have you seen an increased level of interest from some of these more outdated industry in applying some of these like latest technologies and AI and machine learning to make better sense of their business?
Most definitely. I would say that certain industries are ahead of others. My background is more so in digital marketing and in quantitative finance, and they're both on the cutting edge of these types of technologies, but still very much behind sometimes what you read in the news. So there's a lot of disruption to be had across multiple industries, but the adoption has been slower in certain industries just because they're older industries and they've stayed focused on the more core fundamentals of what it takes to be a manufacturer or a distributor or a retailer. And that's where we like to come in and help out and bring some technologies from other industries like the quantitative hedge fund industry, as well as new technologies that we've developed to markets like what we're focused on today, which is the home improvement market. So if you're a manufacturer of anything that you would find in like a Home Depot or an Ace Hardware or a Lowe's, so that could be anything from lawn and garden products. For example, one of our customers, we allow them to make decisions on how to better service their end consumer based off of not just what's happening in their data, but also their competitors' data. And we think that using a broader data set is really the importance of being able to experience the full potential of AI. So we sit in the camp of data first, but we do leverage a lot of these open source tools and libraries that allow us to make the data more actionable and clean.
It's definitely a space that's been attracting a lot of interest from founders, consumers, interest, especially over the past 12 months. So I'm curious, coming into this round, how do you feel let's call it the general perspective around AI machine learning and interest around it helped your narrative around raising this round?
Oh, I would say that it was very beneficial. And it was interesting. The environment that we're in right now was beneficial to us for a couple of reasons. Going into the round, we were probably thinking of ourselves more as like a B2B SaaS company. And even though we were leveraging AI, we still wouldn't call ourselves an AI company today. Frankly, I don't think 99% of the companies that call themselves AI companies should be calling themselves AI companies. It's a tool. And if you have the right data and business problem to apply it to, it becomes beautiful and it becomes very powerful. But the way that we benefited from this macroeconomic environment was for a multitude of reasons. One was that we actually had revenues and were close to profitability. So that was something that this market favors that a market 2 years ago wouldn't have really cared about. And it wasn't easy to get there. We had to turn around, cut some costs, figure out how to stay focused. About a year ago, we were running shorter on cash. We were never super close, but we organically turned the business around. So the market liked that. And then in addition to that, I will say that the hype around AI has been very beneficial. A lot of the capital allocation that used to go to markets and technologies that haven't had the same level of value realization yet, like blockchain's an obvious one, but there are some other exploratory things like the metaverse and whatnot. In a bull market, everyone wants to take bets on those longer term projects that might end up paying off 10 years from now. But in a bear market where LPs are becoming less risk averse, you're finding yourselves with companies that actually have paying customers and customers that are staying, which is two things that we're very proud of, and high ACVs, and these like more B2B business models that actually print cash to be favored. And B2B SaaS and big data analytics and AI all fit that bucket more.
Absolutely. It feels like it's a perfect cocktail, right? Like you're also riding the historical trend and looking forward in the next 5 to 10 years, everybody's betting very deeply and heavily on AI machine learning, but at the same time having the right unit economics and a proper business around it, able to leverage a little bit of the hype of the market, but also provide the right investment opportunity to people.
Yeah, most definitely. It all depends on what type of investor you want to partner with and how you want to run your business. But it is interesting. I love the hype. It's great. I kind of like fell into this field and I've been working my whole career on data. I fell in love with this market called alternative data specifically, which is really been on the cutting edge of data science and data engineering, data processing, really large data sets. And now everyone's catching on to this AI wave. And me and our team and our investors, we sit in the camp that we love AI, but at the same time, we think that it's really the data that creates a moat around your business. So if you don't have ownership of that data, very few businesses are actually going to be successful. So performing the right ETLs, which stands for extract, transform, load, to prepare good data to go into machine learning algorithms is extremely important. And then having ownership of data that you process is extremely important. So overall, we think that we're even better positioned than the average pure AI development company or people that are following that trend that don't have data that's proprietary to them, because we've been working on this for years and we know how to deal and wrangle big data sets, and then feeding it into the actual open source libraries that are being developed is not too complicated.
So let's add a few data points to the current raise. How much money did you raise for the seed round for Datavations right now?
So this round we took in 4.2 million.
And how did you come up to this number? What was the rationale behind raising the 4.2 million for the seed round?
I will say that the financial modeling helped a lot. So we wanted to do a forecast that made us understand how much cash we need to be able to achieve goals that we feel comfortable with. And in this market, another thing that isn't as important is to grow 300% year over year. So we went into it originally thinking that we felt comfortable growing 50 to or 75% year over year. But after some consideration, after a lot of interest in working for Databations, we got a lot of talent flowing in. We said this is an opportunity to capitalize on the current structure of the market where there is a lot of talent available. There's some of these great people that otherwise would be working for maybe a later stage tech company, but a lot of those have failed. So we found a unique opportunity to acquire talent at this time that we think that might not have been available later and that we have not seen available to us in the market when we were in a bull market.
That's very interesting. So it was actually the access to additional resources that made you decide to raise a little bit more capital to be able to hire those people and get that talent in-house and increase your growth as a result of that new brain power that comes into your company.
Yeah, so we had raised a comfortable amount before, not like any of these mega rounds or anything like that. And this is not a big round either, per se. But we were also, when we set out to have conversations, we were profitable. We were printing positive cash flows at the time. And it wasn't a very exciting growth trajectory because we were barely profitable, but we were extremely comfortable to be able to go into the raise and say, let's pick people over capital. And that's ultimately what we ended up doing.
So you mentioned when you first started having the conversation, let's frame this a little bit for everybody listening on how long did it actually take to raise this round. And again, we're speaking about a company who is profitable, is following one of the largest trends that are happening right now in the private and public markets. When did you had your first conversation, and when did the round actually close?
So we all in spent about 6 months raising, and it was primarily a one-man show. Myself, I had a lot of help from some other people on the team, but I never did it full time. So I took about maybe 50 or 60% of my time fundraising throughout 6 months. And the beauty of what we did, which I encourage a lot of founders to do if they can pull it off, is to use a safe note. And our round was big enough to justify a priced round, and we were offered a priced round. But the beauty of a safe note is that you can roll investments to deleveraging the risk of the round over a longer time period. And you can cherry pick your investors. You don't have to bring them all in at once. And you can learn and get to know your investors or your potential investors before the mutual transaction happens. And yeah, so 6 months was good. I felt very comfortable about it because I didn't have to do it full time. And we had a tremendous business momentum still because of that, while I took some resources and put it into the fundraise.
And over the course of these 6 months, with approximation, how many investors would you say that you had conversations with?
That's a good question. So I look at fundraising a little bit differently than what I think a lot of other people do. And I've tried the more traditional tactics, but they tend to, or by traditional, I mean like more like sales tactics or business development tactics, where it's like it's all volume game, it's all numbers game. And sure, it will get you some checks, it will get you some investors out there, but if you're focusing primarily on volume and saying, oh, we need money now, I'm going to go out and complete this raise, and I only have 6 months, I don't think that's very wise, especially in this market. So I was fundraising for years. I've been fundraising since I started the company, and building those relationships, what you're like, similar to what you're doing with this podcast, that's what it's all about. It positions you to have access to the people that you need for when you need money. And it positions you to have relationships with people that you can trust. And ultimately, you want to partner with an investor that you can trust and an investor that shares the same core fundamental values as you do. So the investors that came into this round, I could not be more pleased with them because we have extreme core value alignment as it relates to the way we think about business ethics and things like that. But then in addition to that, a strong value alignment on the theses that we have on the market as it relates to big data, AI, and analytics.
That is a great insight of going for depth rather than volume, right? Of figuring out how can you build true relationships with the right individuals and vet them over time, and quite frankly, them vetting you over time and being comfortable to underwrite you at that stage with your vision rather than taking a more sales-like approach.
Yeah, don't ever start the race. Just always be raising.
Indeed, always be raising seems the motto of these days. So I'm curious your thoughts on people who may not have the luxury of time. Let's say they're listening to this podcast a little bit late in their cash burn journey, so they only have 3-4 months left. Do you believe that those people are now out of luck? Do you believe there's still something to be said about the volume play and getting people across the line when you need cash the most?
Cut costs. Go back to eating beans. You should eat last. Leaders eat last, right? So like your salary gone or minimum wage, like just enough to survive. And then in addition to that, you have to reconsider why you're in this position. It probably isn't just your fault. It might be individuals that are involved in business. And you have to reassess and make some hard decisions. Business is tough, right? And if you run into a raise and you think that raising capital is the solution, I think you might be able to double the amount of time, if not triple the amount of time that you have to end up partnering with the right investor with terms that actually makes sense for you rather than running into a raise and hoping that you get that figured out in 3 months because the likelihood is very low.
Fantastic advice. So I'm curious, in the context of building relationships with folks, even if you're always be raising, what are some of the tactics of advice that you have for people to get in front of those investors, build a relationship before they've actually opened up the safe note or they're actually in the market needing cash?
Yeah, most definitely. So I would say spend every weekend networking and make it genuine. So find people that you like and enjoy spending time with. I mean, you're a founder of a tech company for a reason. You must have some interest that aligns with other people, right? Otherwise, you're in the wrong role. And you can find that in various ways. If you're highly technical, there's a tremendous amount of great development workshops you can meet up at and meet people that way and have that more technologically intellectual experience. There's also a tremendous amount of communities out there of founders that you can get to. And I would say networking doesn't have to have, it shouldn't have an objective. Make it a friendship and develop friendships like I have with Mark, who you work with. It's important because when we meet up to have dinner together, I don't have an objective, but we know that we have each other's backs if anything were to happen. And even though Mark's the best, I have 20 Marks in my life, and I feel comfortable calling them when I need something. But the reason they're in my life isn't just because of that. It's because of an intellectual exchange and a passion for technology and entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. And I would agree. Everybody needs a Mark in their life. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts, given the conversation you had about the meetups, the dinners, and with the background of COVID over the past and the pandemic over the past few years and the uprising in virtual meetings. I'm curious do you believe that fundraising relationships can be created virtually, or there still needs to be a handshake for the investment to come through?
I think it's more than a handshake. You need to develop relationships in person with people for it to actually be a good fit. Granted, I haven't raised from these big, super reputable VCs that everyone hears about in the news. I've raised from VCs that are very specialized in specific industries, which to me are a much better fit for our company. But when you're doing the game of raising from VCs that you're focused more on not the brand name, but what they can bring to the table, which especially if you're a vertically integrated software company like us, you're going to want to find people with a network that you can benefit off of, for example. And when it comes to that, yeah, I think you need to meet those funds in person. You need to develop those relationships, and you need to do it over a long amount of period of time. And I would say don't start with the funds per se, just start with people that you enjoy speaking with, and then the funds will come.
You mentioned the network as a specific value add, but I'm curious to explore a little bit more of your perspective of true value add and in this process of building relationships and with time vetting investors that you want to be part of your round. What are you really looking for?
For me, it's really important to have core value alignment. It seems like they have the same fundamental beliefs about what's important in a business relationship and a culture of a business, simultaneously having alignment on theses as it relates to like where the industry is heading, which I think will allow for a lot more collaboration. And then last but not least, you need to have a diverse skill set. So even though you want alignment on these more fundamental values, you need to bring people on to your cap table that they can do things that you can't. So that could be things related to understanding how a later stage financing works, but it could also be related to how to scale up a sales and marketing organization. It could be related to understanding the customers that you're selling to in depth and having had rules at those customers. So those are three examples that we've been able to leverage from our investor base.
And there is, to some extent, a barrier, right? Or at least a persona, right? That people are putting out there. And there's a lot of things happening in venture, which is quite frankly a relatively small network of people in different cities around the world, where some people may portray themselves as being able to be super helpful in one particular direction, but in reality, they weren't really able to deliver through that. So I'm curious if you've encountered that, or what were some of your strategies of really vetting what those people can truly bring to the table outside of what they can say they can bring to the table?
I find that we're uniquely positioned because we're in a very, call it specialized industry, bringing technology to a market that doesn't have a lot of cutting edge technology. So that creates essentially like a gap where there's not a lot of people that actually know our industry that are investors in early stage technology companies. So for us, it becomes pretty apparent right away because a lot of funds that can't help us, they don't understand manufacturing, right? So then they can't even do diligence. So having them do appropriate diligence is very important. But if they can't do diligence, if they can't get the right people on the phone to ask, is this legit? Then you know that they're not a good fit. So that was one more observation than a tactic. If they didn't get feedback from a potential customer that they're also willing to provide an introduction to upon providing you with capital, then there's really no point in partnering with them. I mean, there might be other reasons to take capital from them, don't get me wrong, and we've done that. But if you're truly trying to find someone that understands your industry, then their diligence process should include either introducing you to or promising introductions to specific individuals that have given in-depth feedback on what you are working on.
It really feels like a Uno reverse card, right? Like leveraging the diligence of the investor to diligence the investor itself. But I like it. I feel it makes a lot of sense. And quite frankly, a lot of people who have websites to where there's hundreds and hundreds of advisors, but in reality, who picks up the call when Datavations comes knocking on the door and says, hey, I would like to raise capital from you? Do you really have people in your network that understand what we're doing and can help?
Yeah, one other thing that our investors have done really well, which I'll give them great kudos for, is to introduce us to the people involved in the business. And that has been, or involved on their end, right, in the venture fund. And if those people bring a level of expertise within fields that you might not have knowledge in, that you want to gain knowledge in, that's a good sign. If they bring expertise within your field, that's a great sign. And if they bring a network on top of that, that's a phenomenal sign. So one of these investors we brought in this round, actually two of the investors in this round, have gotten us customers already prior to investing in the company. And I think asking for introductions from people that have capital to people in their network for potential business partnerships is perhaps the most effective way to close a round and also see if they can benefit your company. So don't ask for money, ask for introductions. Don't ask for introductions to other investors, ask for introductions to customers. And this, I note, is primarily for B2B. But in B2C, I'm sure there are angles where you could ask for introductions outside of capital as well, be it a digital marketing agency or something like that. But then they have a person vetting you and doing that diligence for you. That's an actual end customer, and you get revenues and just make sure you close the deal. You might have to walk through some additional walls on that front, but we closed the two introductions we've gotten from our two separate investors.
I would like to spend just a second on something that I heard you saying of don't ask for introductions to other investors, ask for introductions to customer. I understand the second part, but I'm curious to explore the first part of what you said. Do not ask for introductions to other investors. Why?
Well, so it's a little bit goes against everything else we were talking about before. This is specifically if you're talking to a venture investor. You don't want to be tossed around. And actually, this book talks all about it. Fundraising by Brian Breslov. Everyone needs to read this. It's mostly for very early stage fundraising. I would say that the tactics in this book don't even apply to the round we just did, but some of them still do. And one of the principles that I got out of this book is to not ask for introductions from one investor to another. And I've found myself doing that a lot. And when I tried raising originally, and it's not good because if you get an introduction and that company didn't put in money, why should you? You already have a bias towards a negative. In addition to that, I think that if your deck and information floats around too much, eventually it will end up in the hands of a portfolio that has a potential competitor, and they could leverage that information against you.
So let's double down on this. Let's say you may not have yet the extensive network that you, for example, have right now, and there are certain investors which obviously prefer warm introductions to be able to sit at the same table. Who are the best paths into those investors, if not other investors?
So great paths into investors are other founders. Probably the most powerful one is if you can have a founder that has an investor backing them already, provide you with an introduction and an endorsement. But I think you would want to develop a real relationship with the founder, even in that scenario, before you ask for it, where you would like to have a true intellectual exchange about your businesses and ideally somewhat of a light friendship where you've met in person. And at that point in time, the endorsement becomes a lot more legitimate. So the founder intro is really strong. Another way is to go from the back end, which is the LPs. So if you can manage to raise money from some high net worth individuals, the way you vet them is to ask if they invested in venture funds, right? And if they have invested in venture funds and they're already a part of your cap table, that becomes a very strong introduction as well, especially if that venture fund does a later stage than what that LP invested in, who's usually more of a super angel type person.
Fantastic, really insightful answers. So what are you going to do differently as you're preparing for your Series A? What were some of the key learnings coming from the seed, both the good and the bad?
Yeah, well, each round has its own flavor to it. It will be a priced round. So in preparation for the priced round, where we would likely establish governance, like official governance, we are establishing governance ahead of that. So having quarterly advisory board meetings and ultimately setting ourselves up for success. So if we choose to dive in to another round, which we might not raise again, who knows? But if we do raise again, we'll be ready to take on that level of responsibility for a significant growth round. And preparing for it a lot is what we're focused on right now. So that's how we're preparing. As it relates to what we did right, I think that some of the fundamentals that we've been talking about today, had I not leveraged those tactics, we probably wouldn't have gotten to the amount of capital that we had today. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about business performance, right? Make your business perform well. Focus on that first, right? And if it goes back to what you were saying earlier. What do you do if you only have 3 months worth of cash? Figure out how to have 6 months worth of cash. Figure out how to have 12 months worth of cash. In this market, you should be having multiple dozens, ideally, right? Or being close to breaking even. But if you're pre-revenue and you don't really have that luxury, then you just got to cut a lot of costs and think about how to repivot and think about how to start making money from the market, because that gives you a tremendous amount of leverage in this fundraising environment. So I'm sorry, I didn't really answer your question, but what I would do differently, I mean, everything is always a battle for maturity. I'm a young founder. I'm relatively young, not by Silicon Valley standards, maybe, but I'll be 30 this year. And each quarter, the beauty of this job is that you have to become a new person. And sometimes you got to put yourself in your own shoes 10 years from now and say, how would I want myself to react? And take that level of confidence and that level of stability into any negotiation. And then you'll always come out more on top than you would if you had let your emotions get involved in anything. So staying unemotional, staying objective, thinking, and remembering that at the end of the day, it's just business.
Fantastic. You answered more than just my question, so I'm really grateful for you expanding on it, because there's a lot of nuances between different rounds. But as you mentioned, being able to treat each individual's part of the journey independently and applying the right tactics and strategy, and realizing that at the end of the day, it is a business transaction. You're asking another party to put their capital because they're believing in you and what you're going to do over the next few years. And in return, you promise them financial upside and a good business partnership. And at the end of the day, that is hopefully a mutually beneficial relationship. So would love to get into a rapid fire to get a little bit of context around Phil for everybody listening and saying how this person really is, right? So to kickstart things off, what is one thing that people don't know about Phil that they should know about Phil?
I'm from Sweden, so I have a limited accent, but I grew up in Sweden. I moved back and forth a decent amount of my life, so I would say half my education has been in English and half in Swedish, but my first language is most definitely Swedish.
Fantastic. And before knowing that you moved to New York, I wanted to ask you what was your story into Miami, but I'm going to rephrase the question of what was your story out of Miami and why?
Why I moved away from Miami? That's a good question. So I moved to Miami because I didn't have any money, but I could live for free there. So that's how I ended up there, and not paying myself a super big salary, but we've gotten to the point where we have 7 figures in revenues and just raised around and all these things. So I've been financially comfortable enough to move out of my grandparents' place that they had there, which I was lucky enough to live in for the first year and a half out of the company. And I moved back to New York for a couple of reasons. I felt that Miami had a lot of potential, especially during COVID, for that in-person networking. It's a great way to find capital, but New York City brings a lot more access to talent as it relates to hiring, and having that network is very important. I think developers, but also other roles, there's a lack of young talent in Miami. So that's what brought me up north again.
Who's one person that you really look up to or look up to the most?
That's a good question. It's going to sound a little cheesy, but it's probably one of our investors. His name is Jay Steinfeld. He's been a very close mentor to me. He was the founder of blinds.com, sold it to Home Depot, and he's the best-selling author of a leadership book called Lead from the Core, and I would highly recommend checking that out. But in addition to that, I have a lot of people I look up to because I read a lot. So I would say I would attribute 25% or more of my success to my interest in reading business books. And I actually prepared a little bit of a list of the different recommendations I would have for the audience.
I would love to put them in the show notes and actually create a dedicated list for all the resources that you mentioned, because I think people would find that valuable.
Yeah, they're awesome. Some of them are more fun than others, but ultimately, if you are running a business, each one of these books will inspire you and make you walk into your stay-at-home office, most likely, with a higher confidence.
What will be your number one recommendation?
It depends. So I look at it in 3 different categories. One is pure business books. One is biographies or business stories. And the last one is related to self-help and leadership. So I would say for early stage companies, you have to read 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel if you're a technology company. From a biography standpoint, it also depends on what business you're in, but I really like the book How Google Works. It tells you Google's story and why they're so successful. And then from a leadership perspective or a self-help perspective, I would say that a classic is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It really gets at the more philosophy of human interaction, and that's very important when you're running a company.
All great recommendations. And last but not least, we do have a tradition at our company to always end every meeting with a shout out or a point of gratitude between team members. And we believe that exchanging praise is the most valuable thing people can do with each other. So as we're ending this episode and looking back at your professional career, who would you want to say thank you, or who are you most grateful for?
I would probably say thank you to my co-founder, Jacob Lucas. He has been instrumental in being my partner through this business, as well as in building the technology with me in the early days, and now managing to maintain the technology, create the scalability around it. So I would not have been able to get through this journey without him.
What an absolute pleasure to have you, Phil, on the podcast. Really appreciate all your insights, your honesty, your openness, and would love to have you on the podcast if you choose to raise your Series A after you successfully do, because I have no doubts that you're going to be able to do that once you set your mind to. Thank you so much, Phil, for this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vlad. Thanks for having me.
What a great conversation. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe to our podcast and be on the lookout for a new episode in 2 weeks as we interview another amazing startup founder and debrief their successful fundraising story. This podcast was made possible by Flowlie. If you're currently fundraising or planning to do so in the near future, create a free account today on Flowlie at flowlie.com. That's FLOWLIE.com. And get access to an investor database curated just for you and powerful deck sharing capabilities with advanced access and engagement tracking. Are you ready to take your fundraising journey to the next level and join thousands of founders across the globe who use the platform every single day? Find the discount code in the show notes and sign up today. That's it for today's episode. See you next time.